Two movements. Two completely different philosophies about what home means. Two paths that both promise freedom, affordability, and a smarter way to live, but that deliver radically different experiences in practice. In one corner, the tiny house, the darling of minimalist culture, the symbol of living with less, the home you can theoretically hitch to a truck and drive to a new life. In the other corner, the Barndominium, the steel-framed, wide-open, built-to-last alternative that is quietly becoming one of the most practical housing decisions available in 2026. Today we are putting these two head-to-head in every category that actually matters: cost, financing, livability, legal reality, long-term value, and the lifestyle each one genuinely delivers versus what social media tells you it delivers. And I promise you, some of what you are about to hear is going to challenge assumptions you did not even know you had. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now, because this channel is where we go deep on alternative housing every single week. No fluff, no sponsored rose-colored content, just honest information that helps you make better decisions. Like this video if you're someone who is seriously evaluating your housing options in 2026. And stay with me all the way to the end, because the final part of this video is where I break down exactly who should choose each option based on your specific life situation, your income, your land access, your family size, your long-term goals. And that analysis at the end might be the most practically useful thing you watch all year. Do not skip ahead. Everything builds toward that conclusion. Setting the stage for 2026. Before we get into the comparison, we need to acknowledge the housing environment we are actually living in right now in 2026, because context matters enormously when we are evaluating housing decisions. The traditional housing market remains genuinely difficult for a large portion of the population. Mortgage rates have stayed elevated compared to the historic lows of the early 2020s. Home prices in most desirable markets have not corrected meaningfully despite affordability reaching generational lows. Insurance costs have continued climbing, particularly in coastal, wildfire-prone, and severe weather regions, to the point where insurance is now a meaningful monthly expense that buyers did not factor into their budgets even 5 years ago. And the quality of new construction in the entry-level and mid-range segments has continued to draw criticism from buyers and inspectors who find value-engineer materials and compress construction timelines reflected in homes that do not hold up the way homes once did. In this environment, the appeal of both tiny houses and barndominiums makes complete sense. Both offer a path outside the traditional market. Both offer cost advantages under the right circumstances. Both attract people who have decided that the mainstream housing conversation is not serving their actual interests. But they are very different paths with very different outcomes. And choosing the wrong one for your situation can be an expensive and frustrating mistake. So let us get into it honestly. The tiny house, what it actually is in 2026. The tiny house movement has been a cultural phenomenon for well over a decade now, and in 2026 is a more mature, more nuanced, and frankly more honest conversation than it was in the early days when tiny house television shows made the lifestyle look uniformly glamorous and uncomplicated. The reality of tiny house living has had enough time to reveal itself in the lived experiences of thousands of people who tried it. And the picture that emerges is more complicated than the Pinterest aesthetic suggests. A tiny house is generally defined as a dwelling of 400 square feet or less, though some definitions stretch to 600 square feet. They come in two primary forms: tiny houses on wheels, which are built on trailer frames and can technically be moved, and tiny houses on foundations, which are permanent structures on a fixed site. The on-wheels version is by far the more culturally prominent and the more commonly discussed, so that is what most people picture when they hear the term tiny house. The appeal of the tiny house on wheels in its original cultural formulation was a combination of affordability, mobility, minimalism, and freedom from the conventional housing treadmill. You could own your home outright, or close to it, without a 30-year mortgage. You could park it on land you rented cheaply, or on a friend's property, or in an RV park, and avoid the crushing land costs that make traditional homeownership unattainable in many markets. You could theoretically move your home when your life circumstances changed, and you could live with only the possessions and the space that you truly needed, freed from the cultural pressure to accumulate more than you actually use. These are genuinely compelling ideas. And for a specific subset of people in specific life circumstances, They translate into a genuinely satisfying and intelligent housing choice. But they also come with a set of realities that the early tiny house media coverage consistently underplayed, and that anyone seriously considering this path in 2026 needs to understand clearly. The actual cost of a quality tiny house on wheels in 2026 is not as low as most people expect. A professionally built tiny house of 200 to 400 square feet ranges from $60,000 to $150,000 or more, depending on the builder, the materials, the systems, and the level of finish. A high-end custom tiny house from a reputable builder can easily run $120,000 to $180,000. DIY builds can reduce this significantly. Experienced builders have completed quality tiny houses for $25,000 to $50,000 in material costs alone, but they require significant time, skill, and tolerance for the inevitable complications of a major construction project. The idea that a tiny house is an automatically cheap housing option is simply not accurate in 2026. And going in with that assumption leads people to either underbuild a structure that does not hold up, or to discover that the cost per square foot of a quality tiny house is actually quite high compared to other housing forms. The land situation for tiny houses on wheels remains one of the most persistent and frustrating challenges in the entire movement. Zoning laws across most of the United States have not caught up with the tiny house concept. In most jurisdictions, a tiny house on wheels is legally classified as an RV, which means it cannot legally be your primary residence in most residential zones. Parking a tiny house on a residential lot and living in it full-time is technically illegal in the majority of American municipalities unless specifically permitted. RV parks that allow tiny houses are more available than they were a decade ago, but they come with monthly lot rent, community rules, and a transient quality that conflicts with the settled, rooted lifestyle many tiny house buyers are actually seeking. Rural land where enforcement is lax offers more practical flexibility, but it comes with its own set of utility, access, and isolation challenges. Tiny house communities, purpose-built developments designed specifically for tiny house living, have grown in number and quality over the last several years and represent a genuine improvement in the land access situation. Some of these communities are well-run, thoughtfully designed, and provide a satisfying combination of community connection and personal independence. Others have struggled with management issues, lot rent increases, and the complications of building a functional community around a very specific lifestyle choice. As with any housing community, quality varies enormously and due diligence is essential. The livability reality of tiny house life is something that the movement's enthusiasts have become more honest about over time, to their credit. A well-designed tiny house lived in by a single person or a couple who have genuinely internalized a minimalist lifestyle and who spend significant time outdoors can be comfortable, functional, and deeply satisfying. The same tiny house lived in by a family with children, or by someone who works from home and needs dedicated office space, or by someone who has significant possessions, tools, sporting equipment, musical instruments, a wardrobe, quickly becomes cramped, stressful, and ultimately untenable. The lifestyle requires a genuine alignment between the person and the space, and that alignment is real and authentic for some people and a fantasy for others. Social media has historically done a poor job of distinguishing between these two groups. The durability and maintenance reality of tiny houses on wheels is also worth understanding clearly. A tiny house built on a trailer frame is subject to the mechanical stresses of potential movement, the condensation challenges of a highly insulated small space, and the maintenance demands of a structure that combines elements of both a house and a vehicle. Trailer frames rust. Wheel wells accumulate moisture. The small, complex systems that fit all the functionality of a home into 300 square feet require regular attention. Tiny house builders and owners who are mechanically capable and genuinely engaged with their home's maintenance can manage these challenges well. People who expect a tiny house to be as low maintenance as they imagine it to be are often surprised by what ongoing ownership actually requires. The Barndominium, what it actually is in 2026. The Barndominium has had a similarly remarkable cultural moment over the last decade, driven by television programming, social media, and a genuine resonance with a large portion of the population that is looking for a smarter, more flexible approach to homeownership. But unlike the tiny house, the barndominium conversation in 2026 has largely moved past the hype phase and into a more mature, practical, and experience-grounded discussion, because enough barndominiums have been built, lived in, and honestly evaluated to give us a realistic picture of what this housing form delivers. A barndominium is at its core a metal building, typically a steel frame or post-frame structure with metal panel exterior, that has been designed, finished, and lived in as a primary residence. The term combines barn and condominium in a word that has always been a bit awkward, but that has stuck because it captures something real about the aesthetic and functional character of these homes. They are spacious, flexible, durable, and built on a structural system that is fundamentally different from conventional wood frame residential construction. The floor plans that barndominiums enable are one of their most genuinely compelling features. Because steel and post-frame structural systems can span large distances without interior load-bearing walls, barndominiums routinely deliver open-concept floor plans of a scale and character that conventional construction simply cannot match at comparable cost. A 40 by 60 barndominium gives you 2,400 square feet of column-free interior space. And that space can be configured in virtually any way you choose, reconfigured as your life changes, and expanded if your land and budget allow. The soaring ceilings that steel frame and post-frame construction enables, 14 feet, 16 feet, 20 feet, create an interior volume that makes every square foot feel larger and more generous than equivalent square footage in a conventional home with 9-foot ceilings. The cost reality of a barndominium in 2026 is that the kit or shell is affordable and the finished home is a serious investment that should not be underestimated. A steel building kit for a 40 by 60 barndominium might run $20,000 to $40,000. A finished, fully livable barndominium of that size, with foundation, insulation, interior framing, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, finishes, and all the systems that make it a home, will typically run $120,000 to $250,000 in most rural and semi-rural markets, and more in higher-cost regions. That is real money, but it is also a competitive number relative to what equivalent square footage would cost in traditional construction, and the durability and longevity of the finished product compares very favorably to entry-level and mid-range conventional construction. The land requirement for a barndominium is real and unavoidable. You need a piece of land to put it on. You need that land to be zoned appropriately for residential use. And you need site work, driveway, utilities, septic, or sewer connection. That adds to the total project cost. In many rural markets, land is still reasonably priced, and the combination of land plus barndominium build can be cost competitive with a conventional home purchase in a suburban market. But the land requirement means that the barndominium path is fundamentally different from a pure urban or suburban housing strategy. It is a path that requires land access and comfort with a rural or semi-rural lifestyle. The financing situation for barndominiums has improved meaningfully over the last several years. More lenders have developed familiarity with barndominium construction. USDA rural development loans, FHA construction loans, and a growing number of conventional lenders who have added barndominium experience to their portfolio have made the financing pathway more accessible than it was 5 years ago. It is still more complicated than financing a conventional home. You will need to work with a lender who has specific experience with this property type, and you should expect more documentation requirements and potentially a larger down payment than a conventional purchase. But the path exists, it is navigable, and it is getting cleaner as the market matures. The head-to-head comparison. Now let us put these two directly side by side across the categories that actually determine which one makes sense for a given person in a given situation. On pure upfront cost, the tiny house has a potential advantage at the very low end. A DIY tiny house built carefully by a skilled builder can be completed for $30,000 to $60,000 in total cost, which is lower than any realistic finished barndominium budget. But this comparison requires honesty about what you are getting. A DIY tiny house at $40,000 is typically a 200 to 300 square foot structure with compact, carefully selected systems that require significant builder skill and time investment. A finished barndominium at $150,000 is a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot permanent structure on a foundation with full residential systems. On a cost per square foot basis, quality tiny houses are often surprisingly expensive, sometimes running $200 to $400 per square foot when professional builder costs are applied to the small footprint, while barndominiums consistently deliver finished space in the $80 to $150 per square foot range. The narrative that tiny houses are automatically cheaper than barndominiums does not survive honest cost per square foot analysis at the quality level. On financing accessibility, the barndominium wins clearly in 2026. While barndominium financing is more complex than conventional home financing, it is navigable through established loan programs and a growing network of experienced lenders. Tiny house on wheels financing is genuinely difficult. Most traditional mortgage products do not apply because the structure is classified as personal property rather than real property, meaning it does not qualify for the real estate secured lending that carries the lowest interest rates and longest terms. Personal loans, RV loans, and manufacturer financing typically apply at higher rates, shorter terms, and smaller maximums than real estate loans. The monthly payment math for a financed tiny house is often worse than people expect, which undermines the affordability narrative significantly. On long-term value and equity building, the barndominium on owned land wins decisively. A permanent barndominium on a deeded parcel of land appreciates in value over time, builds equity as you pay down any mortgage, and can be sold, transferred, or inherited as traditional real estate. A tiny house on wheels depreciates more like a vehicle than a home. It is personal property that loses value over time and does not build equity in the same way. A tiny house on a permanent foundation on owned land does build equity, but this configuration requires solving the same land access and zoning challenges as a barndominium while delivering significantly less space and functionality. On livability for families and long-term living, the barndominium wins by a wide margin. The space, flexibility, and functionality of a 1,500 to 3,000 square foot barndominium accommodate family life, home-based work, hobbies, and the full complexity of a modern adult life in a way that a tiny house fundamentally cannot. People who try tiny house living as a couple in their 20s and find it satisfying frequently discover that it stops working when children arrive, when aging parents need accommodation, when careers require dedicated home office space, or simply when the novelty of extreme compactness wears off and the daily friction of not having enough space becomes a constant source of stress. Barndominiums, by contrast, tend to get better over time as owners customize them, finish additional spaces, and settle into the generous floor plans. On mobility and flexibility of location, the tiny house on wheels wins. In theory, the ability to move your home is a real and genuine advantage for people whose life circumstances genuinely require or benefit from geographic flexibility. A person who moves frequently for work, who has not yet found a permanent community they want to commit to, or who values the experience of living in different places over time has a real use case for a home that moves with them. In practice, moving a tiny house is logistically complex, expensive, and stressful. It is not as simple as hitching up and driving away, and most tiny house owners move their homes far less frequently than the lifestyle marketing suggests. But the option has genuine value for the right person. On resilience and disaster resistance, the barndominium wins clearly. A permanent steel or post-frame barndominium on a solid foundation is engineered to handle wind, snow, and seismic loads that would severely damage or destroy a tiny house on a trailer frame. In regions where severe weather is a real concern, tornadoes, hurricanes, heavy snow, the structural integrity advantage of a permanent barndominium is not a minor consideration. It is a life safety issue. On environmental footprint, the comparison is nuanced, and honest people should resist oversimplified claims in either direction. A tiny house uses less material to build and less energy to heat and cool because of its small size. And if you genuinely live a minimal consumption lifestyle in a tiny house, your environmental footprint can be quite small. A barndominium uses more material and more energy, but often incorporates solar power, rainwater collection, and other sustainability features that a tiny house on wheels cannot easily accommodate. The honest answer is that both can be made quite sustainable with the right choices, and neither is inherently more environmentally responsible than the other without knowing the specifics of how each is built and lived in. On community and zoning acceptance, the barndominium wins straightforwardly in most of the country. A barndominium on rural or semi-rural land in a county that permits residential steel buildings is a conventional permitting and construction process. A tiny house on wheels navigating the patchwork of zoning laws, RV park regulations, and residential code requirements that govern this housing type in most American jurisdictions is a genuinely complicated legal situation that requires research, patience, and often compromise on the ability to accommodate a workshop, home business, or mixed-use space. The barndominium wins decisively. The wide-open, column-free floor plans, high ceilings, large roll-up door options, and generous square footage of a barndominium make an ideal platform for combining residential and work or makerspace. A tiny house, by definition, does not have space for a serious workshop, a significant home business operation, or any use that requires real square footage beyond basic living functions. Here is the section I promised you at the beginning. Based on everything we have covered, here is an honest framework for thinking about which path makes sense for your specific situation. You should seriously consider a tiny house if you are a single person or couple without children who genuinely embraces minimalist living, not as an aesthetic, but as a deeply held value. If you are in an early life stage where geographic flexibility has real value and you have not yet found or committed to a permanent community, if your budget is genuinely limited and a tiny house DIY build represents the only realistic path to some form of homeownership in the near term, if you have identified a specific land access solution, a tiny house community, a family member's property, a rural parcel where enforcement is flexible, that resolves the zoning and parking challenges honestly rather than hoping they will not be a problem, and if you are mechanically capable and genuinely enjoy the maintenance engagement that a small, complex structure requires, you should seriously consider a barndominium if you're building a life, a family, a career, a homestead, a long-term community, and need a home that will serve that life for decades rather than years. If you have or can acquire access to a piece of land in a rural or semi-rural market where barndominium construction is permitted and financially viable, if you have the financial capacity to complete a full build, either through savings, construction financing, or a combination, without overextending yourself, if you value space, flexibility, durability, and the ability to combine living and working under one roof, and if the rural or semi-rural lifestyle that a barndominium naturally enables, the land, the quiet, the self-sufficiency, the freedom from HOA and dense neighborhood constraints, genuinely resonates with how you want to live. If you're somewhere in between, if you're not sure about the land commitment, if your budget is limited but your space needs are real, if you're drawn to both the freedom of the tiny house concept and the permanence of the barndominium, then the small barndominium or the hybrid approach may be your answer. A 1,000 square foot permanent steel building on a modest rural parcel gives you the durability and permanence of the barndominium format at a cost and scale that is genuinely accessible for many people who feel priced out of a full-scale build. The honest truth in 2026 is that neither tiny houses nor barndominiums are magic solutions. They are both tools, powerful ones, genuinely worth considering, both superior to certain alternatives in certain circumstances. The magic, when it happens, comes not from the building type, but from the alignment between the building and the person living in it. When that alignment is right, when the space genuinely serves the life, when the choice was made with clear eyes and honest expectations, both a tiny house and a barndominium can be the foundation, literally and figuratively, of a deeply satisfying way to live. Do your research. Be honest with yourself about what you actually need versus what you have been told you should want. Talk to people who have lived in each option for 5 years or more, not just the honeymoon phase owners. Run the real numbers for your real situation in your real market, and make the choice that serves your actual life, not the life that looks best on Instagram. That is the smartest housing decision you can make in 2026, in a tiny house, a barndominium, or anything else. If you made it to the end of this video, you are serious about this decision, and I have a lot of respect for that. Please hit the like button right now. It is the single easiest thing you can do to help this channel reach more people who are navigating these exact decisions. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. We go deep on alternative housing, smart building, and real financial analysis of housing decisions every single week. Drop a comment below and tell me, are you leaning tiny house or barndominium? And what is the single biggest factor driving your decision? I read every comment and genuinely love this conversation. Share this video with someone who is trying to figure out their housing path right now. You might be handing them exactly the perspective they needed. And check out our other barndominium and alternative home content linked on screen. There is a lot here for people who think the way you do. Build smart. Choose well. I will see you in the next one.